I got a block of time with my teacher Sharat last week, assisting him in teaching Mysore style, which is something he's only done in Mysore up until now, but he did that in Miami. And Lori asked for a report and specifically asked, "What's going on in the practice these days? We need a report from the field." So this is the report. Um, my key words for the overall vibe. And this applies to really my vantage point on what's going on globally based on teaching in Europe last month and just, the many, many time zones that our shala is showing up in through its shadow aspect, teaching online. Throughout all of that, I would say what's going on in the practice is like we're in an extreme expression of its kind of self-care aspect. So my keywords for the time last week was Sharat. Actually, like that feels like that was an encapsulation of something that's happening more broadly in this kind of intersection of the practice in this moment after a pandemic. And I would say it was care, softness, gratitude, dad jokes, like so much like all of that kind of landing here. Like, my God, we've been through so much. And we still have each other after all of that, being apart, being alone, all of that. Like, the practice is still here. There's still a rekindling that we can do. And it is just so loving and gentle and caring. Like, what do we actually need? Just absolutely beautiful. I loved it. And I've seen the practice manifest in ways that have a lot of loving, kind of devotional, adoring kind of heart energy before. But that has often been in a more kind of culty register where there's kind of like, oh, there's a guru and there's a devotional student, and there's kind of a dynamic where there's like an exchange of strong heart energy. And this is different. It's like there's, instead of that dynamic, there's like a wholeness around that softness and care, because actually the positivity and the gratitude are just for everything, for the world that we have together and that we share. Just so much acceptance and an ability to see past any hard edges, and just a joy in the practice itself. Like, oh my God, what a wonderful thing to have the practice as a way of kind of framing and organizing life. And so it does feel pretty cool after 23 years of kind of participant observation in this field. That's why I said, like, this is one of the most enjoyable times I've ever had in the practice. Not that that's the thing that I'm pursuing is enjoyment, but wow, what a nice bonus to have that there, and to just kind of observe and receive and participate in all of that. I find this, like, it's not the only way that the practice manifests. There's always kind of these inhalations and exhalations of vibes and styles and methodologies and even just like the size and energy around how many people are practicing, that seem to me very natural, even though the yoga itself doesn't change in a transcendent sense. There's always these kind of expansions and contractions that manifest in different ways. The same person that I'm speaking of now, like my teacher, this like showing up with the dad jokes and the super softness, like no pressure at all. Uh, a space in which you just couldn't be anxious about anything, and there's not a strong sense of like, oh, am I okay? Because like the I isn't even really activated because you're just kind of softly participating. Like the same person that I'm working with in that sense, in other times, has also been the person who led me through a really, really intense, disciplined initiation using these same methods, just in a different sort of register, right? And I don't want to disparage that in any way, even if it's not right for the moment. Like, definitely not the approach to practice now. But when you see the term, which we don't even bother to reference around the Shala, but the term certification it's a reference to an initiation process that I have seen drive people mad from its intensity. And I didn't even know I was in that initiation process in 2015, 2016, 2017. You know, I grew up on a ranch. I like doing hard things. I'm a workaholic. Like, great. Like, put me through some sort of like super disciplined, fiery asana test. And I was clueless about the fact that I was being pushed to see if I would break, frankly. But that's what that is. There's just this space in the practice for certain senior teachers who are the asana method itself is used as a way to see what you will do under extreme stress, and use extreme stress for an initiation that really changes your sense of what it is that you can do. So I really did go through 3-4 years where there was no space in my mind for wasted energy at all. And the level of physical discipline being asked of me was, if you weren't doing it by choice, no wonder. Like, it can really break a person, because it would not be fun, the level of self-denial that might be associated with the like getting up at 2 a.m. for the hardest physical thing you could possibly do on a yoga mat, in any case, with very little psychological support, year in and year out. Again, like, this was an initiation that I didn't even know what I was in and was having a great time, but was also an expression of extreme discipline in my late 30s and 40s, right? And that too is Ashtanga yoga, and that is a phase that Sharat and I have been through in our relationship. You know, he decided that was appropriate for my practice, and I agree. Like, it didn't traumatize me. You know, trauma is a response. Trauma is the way you process what happened to you. And I don't look back on that and say it was too hard or it was too much. I was like, those were wonderful years of discipline and sadhana in my life. But this contrast of the super caring, soft, like heart center approach to the practice, and this other sort of the initiatory expression of the practice, which, by the way, I will never see myself as someone who holds that or transmits that. As you know, like I'm just like, your level of engagement with the practice is on you in all ways, and it has to be balanced in the life. Even though I have not always been balanced in any way in my engagement with intense yoga practices, all right? But those two, like that kind of contrast in that spectrum, I think speaks to a bigger spectrum that is really gives life to the practice. And I've thought this always, that the practice really can oscillate between an interpretation that's about self-mastery and an interpretation that is about self-care. And if you are identified with one of those two schools or the other, well, that looks like a conflict, really. But really, I'd say this is an inhale and an exhale. And the self-mastery expression of the practice is about achievement. It's one of the reasons I'm not the best exponent of self-mastery, because it's really hard for me to think of asana as achievement, right? But it's about discipline and accountability. And it's about a certain kind of dynamic within the inner self that you're actually maybe even battling some aspect of the past self that you're getting past. And it's fiery. It's really the element of it has that transformative aspect of fire that changes matter from one state to the next, right? And then at the same time, there's this completely different expression of the practice that's self-care, where instead of like doing, it's about being and acceptance. And instead of like sort of battling with the self to transcend some aspect of the self that's somehow problematic, over here in self-care, it's the world that's problematic. It's the world that creates stress. And we're using the practice to rebalance and frankly cope with the difficulties of this world, right? And so in self-care, it's like earthy. And there's never any need to achieve. Like that, this doesn't even enter in. Like we're using the practice in this really soft, caring way so that we can be in the world. And also self-mastery is so that we can be in the world, right? But as a self who is in control, right? This is also in a way in self-care, it can be about control. It's just like, oh, the accumulated stressors of the world are so great that to even interface with life, I need this tool for self-care. I actually think there's great value to both of these, especially when you can identify them and be clear about the intentions in the expression of the tool, right? And at the same time, again, like if there's an identification with either one of these approaches, it just becomes like an endpoint, right? And all of a sudden, if you're really identified with self-care, then strong discipline and letting go of old ways of doing things and applying some fire and intensity to the practice looks like a kind of, I don't know, violence, right? Whereas from this perspective, if it's all about transformation all the time, over here, this is just lazy, right? And the thing is, like, both of these only serve yoga if you kind of like move past them to the trapdoor behind them, which is self-transcendence. That's what yoga is, like outside of like this kind of inhale and exhale that we're always going to be going through in terms of what actually is appropriate for the moment based on your discernment. In any case, the self-care approach or the self-mastery approach can become a block to just getting over yourself. Like the thing is, like the yoga happens from like this combination of discipline and surrender, right? Over here, from that point of view of really strong, fiery discipline, the fact is the hardest things for the person on the self-mastery path are only going to happen through surrender. And that is actually the lesson of the strong initiations. And the way that it will drive a person crazy is if they try to do it from willpower. It can only happen. Like the super hard, intense, relentless, demanding, like surrender of your life is what is required to get through really hard things, at least on this path. And by the same token, over here in self-care, if it's all surrender, all letting go, all being, like there's a actual need for some discipline in that case. If you're just going like all earth element all the time, right? And weirdly, those are the kind of trap doors into like getting over the self, like actual transcendence of the self. that really, according to Patanjali, right? Like the discipline and the surrender are just a dynamic that are leading to the ability to see the self as kind of a limited perspective anyway, without only seeking those ends of either self-care or self-mastery. And so I do think that because we have to live in the world, there's always going to be a place that we are on that spectrum between self-care and self-mastery. And I actually love this moment that we're in, which is like probably the far extreme of self-care. And I highlight that as a way of saying, like, it's probably going to be the case that for the practice itself on a communal level and in this temporality, for it to be healthy, there will be the arising of a need for more systematicity and more discipline and more fire element. I can already see that happening, actually, in this very moment. Like there's kind of a new spark, a new clarity and strength that is almost being asked for by this like extreme of pure like love and softness, which is wonderful. But there's also space for more. So in a way, this is also my way of saying this practice and enjoy fiery summer. And I'll see you soon.